Dun 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 dun. Bum 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 ba 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 ba. Lords of the Sith is good. Doesn't hold a candle to the Thrawn trilogy, but I still think it's a pretty good book. I mean, this one was 200 pages. I blew through this book in a week and a half because it was a real page turn. I think that's the sign of a good book. When I'm like flipping through this thing because I want to see what happens next, that's the sign. And I gotta read more of Paul S. Kemp stuff because he's a good writer. So, Lords of the Sith picks up a few years after the end of the Clone Wars. There is a resistance movement on Ryloth led by Cham from the Clone Wars, which is a clever callback, by the way. And Vader and the Emperor are going down to personally put out the rebellion, like make an example, like instill fear. And the Resistance gets word of it through their inside information. They decide to launch an assassination attempt on Vader, and do not read the back cover. It gives away like half the book. Like the premise of the book doesn't occur until like halfway through it. So yeah, this is a really good book. It's very focused. Like, again, it's focused on one specific event and one specific day. That's one thing these novels the recent novels, regardless of how I feel about them, they tend to be doing well, so they tend to focus on one specific instance of resistance. Although James Luceno tends to kind of go all over the place. But and this is like the third story we've heard of like an unorganized pocket of resistance making an example of itself, and each time I feel like that version of the story has gotten better and better, and this is the best version of that story. I mean, it's focused, it's intense, the characters are good, like everything, and because there's this here's the thing, we know how this book's going to end. We know that the rebellion's going to fail miserably. We know that. We know it, Vader knows it, the Emperor knows it. But it's still dramatic. Like, you're still hoping against hope that the rebels are going to win. And the reason why is because they actually do a pretty good job of fleshing the rebels out. Characters like Cham and Isval and Bekor, like, they aren't like the most fleshed out characters, but I do appreciate that there was some effort made to give us some new characters to care about. Like, that's one problem I've had with the new EU is that we really, outside of like the Clone Wars TV show and to some extent Rebels, like we really haven't had any interesting new characters created. But here, I mean, it wasn't perfect, but I do appreciate the effort. And along with Cham being, yeah. So you care about them, you sympathize with them, you feel like, oh my gosh, this could work, and it might work, and it just makes it all the more heartbreaking in the end when it just goes up in smoke and Vader just annihilates everyone. And throughout the whole thing, it's a very battle-heavy book, yet what impresses me is just how descriptive it is. Like, Kemp does a really good job describing all the action to a point where you can clearly understand what's going on. Like, I read, like, there's an excerpt of Dark Disciple in here, which got me really pumped for Dark Disciple, which I still feel like that's going to be the best novel yet, just because Clone Wars is some of the best Star Wars writing ever. But, yeah, Golden doesn't do as good a job with descriptions, but I'm not going to fault her for that too much since she is just working off a script and a story that was meant to be a TV series. But yeah, the action in Lords of the Sith is really good. It feels, again, I can clearly see what's happening, and action scenes are pretty hard to write, so kudos to Kemp. Vader and the Emperor are fully fleshed out. I mean, the story isn't about as much them as you'd think. I mean, even though they're on the cover, I feel like this book is a lot more about the resistance movement than Vader and the Emperor, which is fine. I mean, we've seen these characters done to death, there is a bit of an interesting thing. We established Vader as a tank, and we're establishing like this is still a young Vader, so we still have a Vader who's still grappling with Anakin Skywalker. And part of this book is about him sort of like moving on from that past. Like, it was a nice little arc, and it does sort of foreshadow Rebels. Like, okay, he's probably going to kill Ahsoka. Like, facing Ahsoka is probably going to be for him, like, just putting an end to his old life. Yeah. But again, the moments with Vader and the Emperor were good. Just don't go into the book expecting, like, an entire, like, Vader-centric story. Like, they're in there, but it's not their story. I do appreciate the book giving a valid reason why Vader and the Emperor are there. Like, they're there to set an example. They're there to instill fear. Like, it makes sense in a way that... Because one of my faults of Rebels is I was, like, really trying to scratch my head around why Vader was personally coming in to deal with the Rebels. Like, I didn't feel like they were that big a threat. But I feel like Lords of the Sith does a much better job explaining why Vader's coming to deal with the specific resistance movement. And in doing that, I think I'm willing to understand more about why Vader does what he does. Let's see. But yeah, I think the resistance is really fleshed out. You really have a good sense of what they're fighting for and why. And along with just delivering a really good story, I think this works to help enhance Rebels because the leaders of the resistance are the parents of Hera from Rebels. And what's really cool is that by explaining, like, getting a sense of who Hera's parents were and what they were like, it kind of helps explain where Hera's attitude about fighting the Empire comes from, where she gets it from. And what I like is that, unlike A New Dawn, where the whole story just feels like it exists to explain Hera and Kanan's story, like, it doesn't work on its own. This novel, I feel like, works on its own. Like, you don't even have to read Rebels, you can just read this novel on its own and enjoy it, and as a little bonus, you can get, like, this little bit of continuity, but again, it works on its own. I'm sure this will get briefly referenced in Rebels at some point, but again, but you don't have to. But it works on its own. Like, it doesn't even feel like. Because that's my problem with some of the stories, is that they're more existing for the sake of something else. And it's kind of sad that I'm getting more out of the book than I am Rebels TV show, but I do appreciate it. And I also like how it keeps the references to, like, other elements of the canon, like, very minimal. Like, there'll be a brief, like, Hera gets, like, referenced twice. And again, it's like, oh, they have a daughter named Hera. Like, the difference between Paul S. Kemp and James Luceno is he just makes the references short, sweet, and not essential to the story. It's like, again, if you know who Hera is, it'll add a little bit to the story for you, but if you don't, it's not like it's a major element of the story. It's a cool little bit, cool little time, but it's not, like, essential, and nor do you need to know anything about the Clone Wars. Like, they don't get too bogged down in the Clone Wars arc that took place on Ryloth. And whereas Luceno, I feel like he would just go on lengthy references to the other thing, and at times it feels like he'd assume the reader had seen it, and it's like, if you hadn't read any of that, it would just be really confusing to you. Whereas here, it's like, if you know it, great. If not, it's like, it's not going to affect the story that much. And there are Clone Wars references on here too, but again, like, it's not too bogged down. It's not too central to the story that if you haven't seen Clone Wars, like, you're going to be lost. Like, it's not like Plagueis where you have to have read the Darth Bane trilogy or, like, a major element of the story is going to go over your head. Like, cool little snippets, cool little tiebacks, but not essential. And that's ultimately the direction I think. I mean, nothing against James Luceno, but yeah, Tarkin was just way too biographical. And it was way too much like it was more of a codex entry and less than a story. Lords of the Sith was a freaking story. So yeah, I really don't have that many problems with the book. I mean, it moves pretty quickly. I mean, I blew through it in like a week and a half. I mean, I guess my only real problem is I guess I would have liked it a bit more if some of the original characters were given a bit more fleshed out, because at times they're a little two-dimensional, and Also, I feel like the second half isn't as good as the first half. Like, the first half is, like, this big action thing, and then the second half slows down, and, like, I don't know. Like, the second half, you kind of know where everything's going, and again, I feel like if the character bits had been a bit stronger there, I feel like it could have held together. And I would fault Sham for not thinking his Vader kill plan through more, but I feel like they do a good enough job rationalizing his thought process behind it that I'm willing to let slide. So, yeah, this is like the first time I'm actually going to say, like, read this. This is entertaining. Like, don't go in expecting the Thrawn trilogy, like, nothing here is going to, like, Thrawn trilogy, but it does a really, out of all the Star Wars novels, I think this one does the best job of doing what the other ones did. Like, giving us a sense of this time period in Star Wars history where there were pockets of resistance, but it wasn't organized yet. But also just giving us an idea of the evolution of Rebellion, giving us an idea of where the Empire's at. Like, it's more A New Dawn. I mean, this novel does the best job of illustrating what the likes of that time period is. A New Dawn does it, but I mean, it's like, oh, just here's how Harry and Kanan met, which is kind of lame. And then Tarkin does it, but it also just gets really bogged down as biographical. This is just clearly gives us a sense of what's going on. And again, I recommend this book out of all of them. Like, A New Dawn's like if you're curious. Tarkin's like if you're kind of curious or just a Lucino. Tarkin's if you're a Lucino fan. If you don't like Lucino style, you're not going to enjoy Tarkin. If you do enjoy Lucino style, you'll enjoy Tarkin. I'm sort of in the middle, so yeah. But this is like the first book I recommend. It's pretty good, and I'd recommend picking it up. And that's all I have to say on it. So what do you think of Lords of the Sith? Did you like it, or were you like, eh? Comment below and let me know. And now I'm going to start the next book, Dark Disciple. This is my most anticipated Star Wars book. I cannot wait to start reading it. I'm like a huge Clone Wars fan, and I'm still debating how I'm going to do this book. Like, if I'm going to just review it as a whole as a book, or if I'm going to do it separately, because the thing about this book is that, yeah, and you can stop here if you don't care about Dark Disciple, but it's based off of 8 episodes, and it doesn't make it clear what chapters correspond to which episode. If I can figure out which chapters are which episode, I'll just do, like, traditional Clone Wars vlogs. Whereas, if I can, I'll just, because it's 2 separate arcs, so if not, I'll just read the first half. Read the first half, vlog about that, read the second half, vlog about that. But yeah, like, regardless, I'm going to vlog about this, both under novels and Clone Wars vlogs, because it is Clone Wars episodes, and yeah. So yeah, cannot wait to get started with Dark Disciple. Until then, this is JStar60, and may the Force be with you, and if you're considering reading this, like, buy it. Like, it's an easy read. Like, you won't regret it. So until then, may the Force be with you.